Okay, so we have the chance here, and I was actually going to give the first chance and the first question to Kelly, because he was up there and was not able to ask his question. Do you want to ask your question of Julio now? From the stage?
Go ahead.
Well, you know, it's so refreshing to hear someone from the DOE be so frank. It's an incredible change in tradition. So for many years, I worked with the DOE personally, and there was always a very strong interest in IGCC technologies. So the question I wanted to pop to Julio was, will you treat all three capture options equally going forth?
A couple of things first. I wanted everyone to know I took my jacket off in solidarity with Graham. I didn't want him to be the only one up here who was dressed down. With respect to should we treat all options equally, and will we? In the near term, the answer is a very strong yes. Based on the current costs of operation, based on our expectations for nth of a plant cost, based on where we see the technologies going, based on straightforward engineering improvements, and based on the thermodynamic limits by which you can get to these things, it's still a horse race for all of them. And that's true for pre-combustion separation and IGCC plants as well. In our large demo projects, that's represented with 3 big gasification projects, all 3 of which I think are represented here today, actually, Kemper, Hika, and the Summit project. And we see the same thing happening in other countries. Noteworthy in this regard is Japan, which is making substantial investments both in advanced ultra-supercritical boilers and post-combustion capture, as well as IGCC plants. And depending on who you talk to in Japan, they have their own private support there. I see all of these as very much viable. And if part of the value that we would be providing is a fuel diversity, then we need to keep that technical diversity alive in the near term.
Thanks, Julio. Thanks, Julio. Any other questions at this stage? If not, let me ask a question of the panel. There have been fine words, important words about the project, Boundary Dam project, but how important it is. What are you going to do personally in terms of getting the word out? How are you going to use this information? I mean, what are you actually going to do with it? We all agree it's really important, but if it just stays in there, it's not going to be very important at all. So what are you actually going to do? And I'm going to go to each of you and ask you this question, starting with Graham.
So, Peter, what I am going to do is arrange for a significant set of the new leadership in the European institutions to visit here as soon as the weather gets better in the new year. I think. No, I was given that advice. No, I was given that advice. They said you could, of course, try to get it done in the next month, but I think the word that was used was the administrative friction probably won't enable that to happen, and therefore you better postpone to May. But that'll be fine. I'd like to try and tie it up with the invitation we made this morning, which is to get those folks down to Kemper County too. Do those 2 things together. So that's the key thing for me. It's to move that set of people out of the mindset that this is a set of engineering drawings and into the mindset that it can be done, and that raises the question as to why we are not doing it.
Yep. And Julio?
I'll keep this very brief to say we're already in very active discussions with SaskPower and with the government of Saskatchewan and with NRCan in Canada to figure out ways in which we can actually capture the learnings and the data from this project and make it public in many ways. One of the tremendous things that has happened here that is surprisingly ephemeral is hundreds of engineers have put their minds to the task of getting the thing up and running. And that set of learnings is immensely valuable. And so we want to think of ways to support the capture and codification of that information and sharing it as widely as possible. And that will mean almost certainly the Department of Energy would add investment and support into that, both direct and in-kind, as well as to create opportunities to share that data through data portals like EDX that I mentioned earlier.
Brad?
Thanks, Peter. I think we'll have a multi-stage approach to this. I think that there's a really important window to capture in the next 2 to 4 weeks, and that's to actually maximise the exposure that we can get for the commencement of Boundary Dam into the broader general public sphere. And whilst the Institute is already working with SaskPower and will continue to do so about spreading that message, there's another area that I think is really important for us to get more active in, and it's around this this debate for who's right in how to decarbonise. And our view is actually we're all right. It's going to take everything. It's, to use the President's saying, it's all of the above. But what we strike regularly is the Green Group saying, well, don't even count on carbon capture and storage. It doesn't exist. It's just a dream and it's an excuse of the fossil fuel industry. Well, I can tell you every single speech and every single presentation that the Institute gives from now on, especially outside of groups like this one that are already understanding CCS, is going to be pointing out that no longer is that a valid point of view to hold, that it exists, it's operating, and the next ones are close on its heels. And I think that this is a really important element that we've got to start pressing hard on, that power and CCS exist today, and there's more of it on the way, and it's got to be in there. The final thing we're doing now, and we're going to ramp up even harder, is our efforts through the COP process and the UNFCCC, where we already devote 1.5 people full-time to that, and our program for Lima and following that into Paris is fairly large, and this will be one of the showcase pieces that we'll be looking to influence the rest of the world, and particularly negotiators, to open their minds to CCS.
Kelly?
This is a good question to ask me because I've already been doing this since 1995. As an employee of Natural Resources Canada, I first walked through the doors of SaskPower in 1995. Since then, I've been a partner with SaskPower in many respects in the CCS world. In fact, the SaskPower leadership helped me develop the CCS roadmap for Canada and the Clean Coal roadmap for Canada. SaskPower support enabled, and the government of Saskatchewan enabled the IEA GHG Weyburn demonstration project, which brought together a number of people together. Saskatchewan and SaskPower also supported the efforts to get the IPCC report underway in 2002, where we had the first workshop to determine whether we should write a special report that eventually led to the adoption of CCS under the Climate Convention. So there's been a long history. I'm not going to do anything different. I'm going to carry on promoting Saskatchewan in my capacity as the chair of the IEA Greenhouse Program. And you heard from John Gale. He's had a long association. So we're going to continue doing more of the same in terms of getting the essential message across.
Yeah, thanks. I think I might write an article for one of the Australian newspapers. I think that's the sort of thing that's needed, and perhaps other people might do the same with their back in their home country, and see if we can get additional coverage of this. I think it's a really important thing.
So quick follow cycle on that, actually. As of today, Department of Energy has announced this is Energy Month, Clean Energy Month. And one of the first events we're doing, of course, is GHGT12 in Austin. So we'll have an opportunity there to not only draw attention to CCS, but specifically around this project.
Mm-hmm. Good, thanks for that. Other questions, comments? No? I guess people are ready for their afternoon break. So, sorry, was there a... Not sure whether are you making your way to the microphone there, or... Yes. Oh, sorry. There's,
yeah, that's all right.
I didn't see you there, Elizabeth. You've not got your high
I'm
heels
only
on today.
slightly shorter than the microphone. It's okay.
Apologies, carry on.
Well, just hopefully a quick question, but I've been working in CCS for 15 to 20 years now and seen the struggle to get this far. To get to 2050, I think we have about 36 years left. That's to get to 400 ppm. And yes, another round of large-scale demonstration projects is important. Talking to COP is important, and so on. But what really has to happen in the next 35 years to get to CCS commercialization, to get the widespread global industry that we need to get the number of projects going that we need in 35 years?
That was a short question, but I suspect there could be some long answers here. But who'd like to start? Kelly, you wanted to start? Okay.
The first priority I would list is we need the parent for all this. We need a global climate accord. None exists currently. Well, if we look at what happened last week with the UN Secretary General trying to reignite discussions by inviting world leaders to a summit in New York, from what I gather, there's been some progress. The timeline he hopes to deliver is essentially start working on the draft by the time of the COP meeting in November in Lima, for finalization in Paris in 2015. I hope to goodness he succeeds, because we do need that umbrella in order to determine the targets that we are seeking. Thus far, the targets adopted is 2 degrees, 450 ppm. All the IEA modeling suggests that those targets would require significant amount of CCS. Hopefully accompanying that would be a price for carbon. And we need at least $50 a ton of CO2. If all those things happen, then it's going to go.
Brad?
It's almost unfair. I'm conflicted because that's one of my employees. Did you set me up with this question, Liz? Look, I in part agree with Kelly, but I think I have difficulty seeing that happen, Kelly. So my view of it is we need to be working hard at an individual government and intergovernmental level, and I would cite, for example, the relationship that you're seeing develop between the United States and China at the moment. And I think that those forums are very important for making sure that CCS is being treated on an equitable basis to other low emission technologies. And it's almost impossible today to see that being the case, perhaps with the exception of the UK. So to my friend Dr. Ibbott, you get a plug up here. But I think that there's actually more to be gained by working in individual nations and on intergovernmental relationships, because my fairly long experience of looking at the COP is it's not going to get there because there are too many distracting issues going on in those negotiations. I'm probably going to steal Julio's thunder a bit because he drew this to my attention, but I agree with him entirely. I actually think it's the likes of the G20, the G8, the Clean Energy Ministerial Forums like that actually offer us greater opportunity. But Peter, in short, I think it all does come down to policy settings, because I think once you start getting those right policy settings, the investment will follow.
Julio?
3 things quickly. First of all, even though you attempted to steal my thunder, that usually doesn't work. So I've got plenty of thunder left. And in particular, I would sort of expand on what Peter said about what Brad said, in that we basically, since everybody has to clean up their rooms, the best thing to do is to just go about cleaning up our rooms. It turns out, Rob Sokolow did a lovely study a little while ago in which he broke the world up into 4 groups. US was a quarter of emissions, China was a quarter of emissions, OECD countries were a quarter of emissions, and everybody else was a quarter of emissions. This actually means that you don't actually need a lot of countries to make 75% change. So in fact, the club that's necessary for dramatic progress is pretty small, and there's actually a role for specific leadership. And the leadership shown by the United States, by Canada, by the UK, by Norway, by a couple of countries, actually really matters. Second thing I'd say is, like I'd said before, this really isn't an issue of cost anymore, it's really an issue of financing. That is at its heart a policy decision. If, for example, just throwing out a pure hypothetical, if Germany expanded its feed-in tariff to include CCS, I bet we'd see a lot of plants built. It's not a cost issue, that's a policy issue. And one could point to other countries and make the same kind of mental exercises. By no means does this have to do with Germany per se. But in fact, there are many, many ways to think about financing the construction of these plants. And that's actually at the core of a lot of this. The third thing I want to say is, in that exact context, I think an important goal that we should bring forward, in part thinking about Paris, but just generally speaking, is the idea of policy parity. And this is something we've had discussions with the United Kingdom and other countries, that if you can treat carbon capture and storage the way you treat other clean energy technologies, that should be enough. At that point, that really is a level playing field. And if CCS can't compete in that context, so be it. But if in fact, as we expect in many markets, it will be the low-cost option, then you want to in fact enable that in a constructive way.
So I think all of that's true. So the question is, what could you add to it? But I think the critical point here is that the idea that you needed one single global agreement to which everybody would adhere in the same uniform fashion is part of the problem and not part of the solution. That what we should want is that, following on from the Secretary General's event in New York, that we move to an understanding within the UNFCCC process that that is true, that what we want to do is to enable those who wish to act, and we'll add it all up later to see just how well we are doing along the way, that the number of people who have to do that is a lot smaller than all, and that's absolutely fine. I think then it's also quite clear that actually, it's not even about financing, because financing capture is not that tough. The real thing it's hard to finance is storage and infrastructure. We're going to have to get our minds around that, and it's going to require a different way of doing some of that from the way in which we've approached the problem to date. We need better business models and better innovation in order to make all that happen. And finally, I think that indeed it's about the understanding, this core understanding, that what you need to reward in all of this stuff isn't the number of tons of CO2 you store. It's the amount of clean production that the commercial entity produces. And that leads you inevitably to the point that actually it's about something like a feed-in premium executed at the member state or national level that drives that change most effectively. Pay people for doing what they do. Don't try to force them to do what they don't do.
Thank you very much for those thoughts. Peter Radgen has been waiting there for a while. I hope it's a quick question, but anyway, carry on.
Yeah, well, I think the answer can be very quick, and it goes a little bit in the direction of the current discussion. So I would be interested, when we talk about CCS, we are mainly, and Giulio mentioned it, it's kind of leadership which is needed, political leadership. So I would like to ask you, Giulio, well, is the US willing to take a leadership in Paris some time ago? As I think it's critical. To Brad's question, well, we have been seeing the Australian having some leadership, but having fallen behind it significantly due to the recent policy changes. So maybe you can comment on, do you see a political leadership coming back up in Australia? And for Kelly, for sure, is what kind of support can your organization deliver that the governments will be willing to lead? Thank you.
Yes.
Another short answer, Kelly?
I think I was next, and I think to use an Australianism, you've perfectly put me with a foot either side of a barbed wire fence at this point, and that's a very uncomfortable place to be. I happen to be Australian. I'm not employed by the Australian government. I think that many things need to be contextualised, and my comment to you about the Australian policy scene would be watch this space. Nothing's forever.
I really liked Julio's answer because in 1997, nothing happened till the last minute, till Al Gore and Bill Clinton took a stand, and Kyoto happened. So we need that leadership, and I hope it's forthcoming, Julio.
Well, let me expand just a little on that. I was being coy. The fact is that, again, I view our current leadership as best in class in this arena. John Kerry, as Secretary of State, is deeply, passionately committed to important outcomes in climate change and has voted with his feet on this many, many times. Same thing with Secretary Moniz, same thing with Administrator McCarthy, and all of them are responding to the strong, uncompromising leadership of the President in this arena, too. I think we view it as a critical opportunity to make progress. And I can certainly tell you that it's an all-hands-on-deck activity right now, trying to figure out what are actions that can be taken, what are things that make sense, both within the United States and between countries in advance of Paris.
Peter, there's a second part of the question I didn't
Okay,
answer.
very quickly, we're really running out of time here.
As far as the IEA greenhouse program is concerned, the way we operate, which you're probably, hopefully aware of, is the IPCC principle, policy relevant but not policy prescriptive. So we function by providing impartial assessments, high quality studies, information that is fed into our parent, the IEA in Paris, who then take it and turn that information into policy advice. That's how we function.
Graham?
I just think to add to that is that we as the community need to help them to be those leaders. These two things come hand in hand, and it's our willingness to show that these things can get done assists the leadership position in occurring. So between now and Paris, we need to make sure we do the best we can, and for us that means doing the best we can both at the European level, but within the European member states to ensure that they go with that message that this CCS storyline is a critical part of that new way to approach the bottom-up delivery of the climate goals.
Okay, thank you for all the responses there. Just in my role as provocateur, as I was described by Julio, I just make the point that I'm not sure I necessarily agree with the underlying view in the question. I think that you could argue very cogently that the United States has, by its deeds rather than its words, has continued to show great leadership in CCS. Now, we shouldn't forget that. I mean, you just put the map of where the projects are, most are in the United States, so rather than Europe. So, I do question the assumptions behind that. So, I think we've had a really interesting session, and I'd like you to join with me in thanking the panel members. So thank you very much.